Okay, folks, let's go ahead and get this train on the road. And we are going to talk a little bit today about time management because people continually ask me about how they can better manage their time and how I manage my time. Now, for some reason, I have a reputation as being very productive, and I'm not really sure why that reputation exists other than I consistently have stuff that comes out. That's not to say I'm super good at managing my time or all my time is consistently productive. I'm just pretty good at coming out with stuff when I know that I have to come out with stuff, and I tend to work on things. I don't take weeks off or months off from anything. I continually work on one thing at a time until it's completed, and that's one of the things that I do. But I did want to address this because it is something that people talk about a lot. I'm not the best person in the world for this, but I seem to be able to come out with a lot of different things at a given time. So that tends to help the reputation. I did come out with a video series a year or two ago called Keys to Prolific Creation, like how you can be a more prolific creator, how you can be constantly putting out more stuff. And there were 8 different things. You can look up those videos, but it had to do with working consistently, avoiding perfectionism. There's lots of things that can stop you from coming out with a product. Self-doubt is a big one. So what I want to talk about first before I dive into some strategies for time management that have worked for me and have worked for other people that I know in the past. Let me say that most people who complain about not having enough time or complain that they mismanage their time don't actually suffer from a lack of time. Now, hopefully I'm not going to offend too many people by saying this, but in most cases, when somebody says that they don't have enough time for something or they're bad at managing their time, it's usually a misalignment of values. That is to say, the things that they want out of their life they aren't getting, and they assume it has something to do with their ability to manage their minutes in the day, rather than their ability to organize their life in a way that makes what's important to them just happen as like a natural process of their life. Just as an example, I frequently get emails from people that feel trapped in their life. They are stuck in the corporate rat race. They're working a government job that isn't fulfilling. They're in a personal place where they feel like they can't get out. Like maybe they're in some small town and they want to get out of it, something like that. A lot of the themes that get repeated is that people feel trapped in their life. They feel like they can't progress to what they actually want their life to be. And so one of the ways that people express that is that, how do you have time to write? How on earth do you have time to come out with all these books and have a family and in some cases have a job, right? Like, so, I used to work full time and it was a full-time plus job. I worked 50, 60 hours a week sometimes. That was when I was a high school band director. I was also like the fine arts chair for the school district I worked in. And I still came out with like several books in a year, right? And the way that what it really comes down to is not how good I am at managing the minutes. It's how I arrange the priorities in my life so that the things that I really care about happen. So one of the things with procrastination, someone asks, how can I solve my procrastination problem? So Swords and Shotguns has this. Procrastination is a symptom of this underlying problem that your life is just not organized in the way that you want it to be to deliver to you the things that you actually want. So just as an example, let's say that you feel out of shape, right? Like you feel like you're too heavy or you're too skinny, or there's something with your body that's not correct. Well, there's, the solutions to that are pretty obvious, right? You got to go to the gym and you got to eat right. So what do people complain about when it comes to that? Well, I don't have time to go to the gym. Or it's really hard to eat a good diet. And that really, both of those have to do with the way that you've arranged your life. You've arranged your life so that there's literally no time to leave whatever your present situation is and go to a place where you can exercise. And people suggest things like, well, why don't you just put on your shoes and go running? Go run around your neighborhood. go to the park and do pull-ups and push-ups. That's basically what I do right now. I don't really have time, or I'm unwilling to. I'm going to rephrase it the correct way. I'm unwilling to spend 2 hours a day going down to the gym and lifting weights. So I do my cardio every other day, and then I do just bodyweight workouts to keep my strength up, because that's what matters. Like, I need to have my heart healthy so that my family will have me for a long time, and I need to be strong enough to be able to do the things that I want to do in my life. I don't want to be winded from unloading my truck, right? I don't want to be winded from like putting up a fence or fixing a fence. Those are things that I need to have enough endurance and strength to do. So I do those things that keep my strength up, and then I do the things which are healthy for my heart. And that to me represents an ordering of priorities. Now, once upon a time, those priorities were like inverted. When I lived in Las Vegas, I used to spend 2 hours a day at the gym plus, and that was because I really cared about my body looking good. So I ate an extremely strict diet. I went to the gym, I worked out a lot, and ordered my life around having my body, the outcome of my body looking a certain way. And once it looked a certain way, that was great, except my life changed. I got married, career started happening, kids started happening, and you look at it and it's like having an optimal appearance is just a lower priority than having optimal health. Because one of the big mistakes people make is they look at a bodybuilder who's really big and really ripped, and they think, well, that bodybuilder, he must be really healthy. And if you know anything about pro bodybuilding especially, that's probably not the case, because there's so many drugs and things that you do, and you're putting your body under such extensive wear in order to build up that hypermusculature. You end up with major health problems. One of the things that you can watch, I think it's on Netflix, it's called The King. It's about Ronnie Coleman, the greatest bodybuilder of all time in most people's books. He was an 8-time Mr. Olympia, 8 times in a row. And he was just a tremendously huge guy. Absolutely one of a kind genetics for bodybuilding, but he also, in order to compete, you got to do a lot of drugs. So he did a lot of drugs, which burns your system out, which has health consequences. And in order to build up this tremendous musculature, he used to lift just obscene amounts of weight, squat 800 pounds, leg press like 1,300 pounds, these sorts of really extreme exercises to get his legs to be just the best legs. Like, every body part on Ronnie Coleman when he walked on stage was like the best body part, probably with the exception of his midsection, which wasn't distended, but it just wasn't as good as a lot of other guys like I don't know, Sean Ray and some of the other guys that were around at the time, or even Jay Cutler, even though Jay Cutler's pretty blocky. Yeah, some 920 Mario says Ronnie's a hot mess now, and that's the consequence of that, right? Bodybuilding is not healthy. So anyway, I've reordered that, and occasionally you got to readjust where you're like, man, I've gained over the course of 2 or 3 years, you gain 20 pounds. Well, in order to reverse that, it takes a while to take off 20 pounds and get back down to like a more normal weight. And so that's something I had to do at the beginning of this year. I got up to like 240 pounds with this move. 240 pounds is 20 to 30 pounds heavier than I really need to be. So had to reverse that. So went down 10 pounds, got to go down another 10 pounds. It's pretty easy for me to order my life in such a way that I can eat those healthier foods that are going to help me like cut down to a more healthy weight. I will say at 240 pounds, I can still do pull-ups, which I know a lot of guys who can't do pull-ups at 240 pounds. So my strength didn't really like go away, and I never stopped exercising, but the diet, I didn't organize my life in a way that my healthy eating was part of the plan. So it's more about processes than it is about goals. So when someone says, I don't have time to write, it's like, well, what other things do you have time for? Because when somebody says, I don't have time to write, it's like, well, what do you do in a day that you don't have time for? Well, most people, I'm going to be really honest with most of the people I meet. They're so ground down by an unfulfilling day-to-day existence that they come home from a job that they don't like and really just don't have the will left in their body and soul to go and be creative the way that they feel this compulsion to. You come home, you crack open a beer and you watch Netflix and you go to sleep, or you play some video games and you go to sleep and you do it all again the next day without spending any time on these deeper issues. So the first thing that you have to do before you start thinking about how I'm going to manage my time, before I get to the strategies, is thinking about how you're actually organizing the priorities of your life. And I will tell you the way my priorities are organized. Writing is actually pretty low. Writing is down below health, and it's down below my family, because I need to be healthy in order to serve my family. So time with my family is the number one priority, period. And the health of my family, the well-being of my family is the number one priority to anything. So before I even get to fulfilling my creative urges, either writing or working on new music, first it's taking care of my family. Now, my daughter was born 9 days ago. She's doing great, and mom's doing great. It was a very easy birth, and we're very thankful for that. During that period of time, there doesn't need to be any other priority besides making sure that my wife can recover, that my son is doing okay with this new, highly attention-seeking being coming into his life, and making sure my daughter is okay, making sure my family situation is good. So once that settles in, then I can start adding other priorities on top of it, making sure that I can do, a weekly live stream, making sure I can come out with a weekly video, making sure I'm writing towards progress with my next book, which hopefully will come out in a month or two, and I'll get to do all that stuff with content in the coming months, and then getting to work on music or something else. So one of the things that I have had to personally learn over the last few years is saying no to lots of people. I've had lots of amazing offers to work for people, and I have to be very selective about who I want to work with and what the nature of that work is going to be. So I've had a lot of people ask me to do writing for video games, and I kind of did a little bit of that with one company, and didn't really work out. And one of the things I kind of realized was that as I tried to give them as much time as they needed, I was losing time on the things that mattered to me. And that made me unhappy. It made me unhappy because my priorities were not aligned. So to me, if my priorities are properly aligned, that means I got to say no to a lot of things that I'm presented with, a lot of offers that most people would jump at. And that's because I know that if I'm not doing things according to my values, I'm going to end up being unhappy, and I'm going to feel like I don't have enough time. So this is a lesson that I've learned personally, that it's all about alignment of values and all about figuring out how to make your priorities line up. Now, some practical things. I'll just tell you how I do it, right? This is prior to my daughter being born, and so I may have to work something out once things settle a little bit more. But my time, I have my time, and it starts at about 10 p.m. So people always comment like, how come your videos are coming out at 2 or 3 in the morning? It's like, that's when I could actually get them to come out. And so having my time start at 10 p.m. Is very good. Now, some of you will be like, you're crazy. You must not sleep at all. Some nights I don't sleep much. That's reality. But because my creative time comes at the end of the day, I get to make a lot of decisions about how that time ends up being used. I don't want to schedule my time down to the minute. Some people can be very effective that way, figuring out like from 7 to 8, I do this, 8 to 9, I do this. Some people can be very effective with scheduling. For me, I need a lot more flexibility because of my family and because of who I am and my personality type. My personality type, I need to be able to feel a little more intuitive in the moment. So at 10 o'clock, sometimes a little earlier, depending on when my son goes to sleep, I can start working, and it's my choice of what I want to do. So if I want to, put 1,000 words in my book and go to sleep, boom, that's easy. If I want to put 1,000 words in my book and I want to record a video, or if I feel like I really need to come out with a video that day, I can stay up all night if I need to get the work done in the time that I need to. And I'm okay losing a night of sleep here or there. You shouldn't do that every day. Like, it's not good for you, but I have that option. And so for me, I look at it, it's all about optionality. There's a small downside, which is I might lose a night of sleep, but a big upside, which is I might make a very popular video or make money with it, whatever it's going to be. If I go see a movie in the theater, I'm usually going to see it at 10 o'clock at night, come home, shoot a review at midnight or 1 a.m., go to sleep, right? So for a lot of people, they just can't comprehend that I would just choose not to sleep some nights, and it doesn't bug me and it doesn't bother me. I used to do that when I worked full time. Some nights I would just work all night because there was a deadline that I'd set for myself, and I really needed to get something done to feel fulfilled. And I've learned one of the things is that if I don't get certain things done in a day, I'll start to feel anxious and upset that I'm not making progress. So that's the way that I organize my life or organize my time. It's all my priority for my family, and then whatever I want to do at 10 o'clock creatively happens. And every other day I can do an hour of exercise prior to that, that my wife is okay with. She watches the kids for an hour. I'll go running, do some pull-ups and whatever I need to do to work on my body. And that's it. And there's only really 3 priorities in my life. It's being creative, this is part of it. And this is actually an added one on top of it. Being creative, being with my family, staying physically healthy. Those are the only priorities that I have in my life. And so it makes it really easy for me to schedule time. Other people, if you ask them, like, what are your priorities in your life? They might have a list a mile long, and it's like, you need to figure out how the order of that's going to be, or you're going to feel very helter-skelter. But for me, it works good to have the option to decide what I need to do. And maybe there's a day where I'm super burned out and I just need to play a game for a few hours and go to sleep, right? Or maybe I need to write for an hour and play a game for an hour and go to sleep. Or maybe I want to watch a movie because I want to do some content on it. It's my time and it's my option for what I want to do with it. And I'm good enough at being productive. I know how to be productive in that time and not waste it. If you come home and you feel like you just can't write because you're too burned out, there's some strategies to get around that too. And I'll share some of that. So one of them is, and this works very well for my brother-in-law, who's also a writer, and you've maybe seen him on the channel. His name's Matt Wellman. He writes in the morning because that's him. When he gets home, he's a music teacher too, and we actually worked together before I exited the profession almost 2 years ago. So he works really hard, and he puts all of his energy into his job when he's there. When he's there, his job is his priority. But when he gets home to be with his family, he's burned out and he just wants to spend time with his family and go to sleep. So he writes in the morning. So he gets up an hour earlier. Rather than staying up late, he gets up an hour earlier and he writes. And so his creative energy is spent early in the day before he feels burned out on anything. That's why a lot of people go to the gym, because you're exhausted from a day of work. You go to the gym in the morning so that it's out of the way, right? You fulfill that priority first, and then everything else gets to come, and you don't feel like you're lacking for that. I do the reverse. I do everything else, and then I have as much time as I want after 10 p.m. And that's the way I tend to operate as far as scheduling time. And so that's what works for me, and there's lots of different ways that can work for you. Some people have a really strict schedule, and that works for them. Like, they're like, Monday I do this, Tuesday I do this. Like, Monday I write, Tuesday I edit, Wednesday I put out a YouTube video, Thursday I do a blog post. Like, some people, or like from 8 to 9 I'm writing blog posts, and from 10 to 12, some people organize their life like that. Now, the problem with doing that for me is that I can't adapt to what the moment. Like, maybe there's maybe I need to see a movie and come out with a review on it to have some views and some clicks and stuff. Well, if you're so tightly scheduled that a disruption of that schedule throws off everything, that's a problem for me. Flexibility is important for me. And I also don't like feeling so scheduled that I feel like a slave. If I feel like every minute of my day is planned before I wake up, I don't like that. That does not work for me. I need to be able to be free to make choices during the day. And I don't really schedule my son much at all. People are like, oh, you got to schedule kids. Kids need to be scheduled. I'm like, no. Me and my son figure out what we want to do in that moment. We have a little routine that just develops naturally. Whatever we want to do at the time, it just falls into the routine. Wake up, he'll usually watch like 10 or 15 minutes of like some kids show on Netflix while I like clean the kitchen. And then we like play with toys, go run an errand, or go to the park, eat lunch, take a nap. And I'll work during that nap time normally. Then he'll wake up from the nap, and then we'll play some more. And my wife will come home, spend time with my family. 10 o'clock, it's time for me to be creative, right? I don't schedule my son down to the minute. Some people do that, and I've taught so many kids over the years as a guitar instructor, as a private guitar instructor, that they had so many minutes of their day scheduled. Of course, these are older kids, like elementary school kids, that they were miserable. Like, you could see it on their face. If you really talk to them, they're like, I really hate the fact that I can't like sit down and play Nintendo or I can't do anything fun in my life. I remember talking to this 10-year-old kid. He's like, I don't have anything fun in my life. Every single day of the week, he was scheduled from the time he woke up until the time he went to sleep. And I had some times like that when I was a kid, and so that had an effect on me. I don't like it. So that's kind of me. Let me look at some of the chat, and I'll see if there's any other things I could talk about with time management. Anyway, mostly the big takeaway is if you're complaining about your time, having trouble finding time for the things that you want to do, it's probably because you're either not aligning your priorities correctly or you're misidentifying your own priorities. Some people say, I really want to do this, but they are unwilling or unable to do the things which require that. Like if you say, I really want to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's like, great. Are you spending your 2 hours a day at the gym or your 4 hours a day at the gym and doing the correct drugs or whatever to look like that? And they're like, no, I can't get to the gym. It's like, then you don't really want to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? Or you would be actively trying to correct that. So you have to identify what you actually want. And for some people, what they want is to casually write from time to time and come out with a book every once in a while, and then otherwise have fun with their leisure time. There's nothing wrong with wanting leisure time, and I want to express that. It's okay to want to have lots of leisure, to want to have lots of downtime, and not feel like you're working all the time. I get it. If you're working full time and you come home to work, that doesn't always feel good. But I don't look at writing as work. It's not work, right? Because I'm progressing towards my goals and I'm enjoying the process. So for me, it's not work. I've never worked a day in my life from that perspective. I've worked jobs. Like I've never worked in music. And that's not true. I've worked in music. I've never worked in writing. I do what I want. JR Crash said, saw a news story where a guy got stuck into his car and a bodybuilder just happened to be there to lift the car off him. Yeah, a world champion powerlifter deadlifted the car. Now, if you're really strong, you can actually deadlift the car. You only have to pick up like 800 pounds, like only 800 pounds. But there's dudes who can deadlift that without any problems. They're so strong. Someone says, your Oblivion video helped me a lot at Zerium TV and just wanted to say thanks for it. Well, you're welcome. Oblivion is a fun downtime for me. Contrarian 420 says, I think it's a mistake to depend on an externality like a job or a relationship, etc. for contentment generally. You should find the contentment within you, and you will bring it to any situation. I actually disagree with that. Not that you're bad for thinking that way. Do whatever works for you. But I'm the opposite. And rather than thinking about it as an externality, satisfaction doesn't arise from nothingness, right? Satisfaction arrives from action. It arises from the release of tension. The tension could be a desire to accomplish something in your life. It could be the desire to eat something, right? You eat something, you feel satisfied, right? No one would say, well, you should bring your satisfaction with you and not worry about being satisfied by food. It's like that's a natural hunger response. If you can suppress that, good luck. You're going to be in better shape than I am. But externalities are important. That's what you're trying to achieve in life. So you don't want to rely on things that you have no control over for satisfaction, right? So this is a thing for a lot of people who aren't married yet, is they tend to go into that relationship, and this is the truth of what Contrarian is really saying. You tend to go into that relationship and it takes over your being. And then when that relationship fails or goes away, it's a crushing moment. Now, as I'm married, my marriage is never going to go away as far as I'm concerned. And it would be very crushing if it did. But I work actively to keep that thing going and keep it happy. And that's part of my contentment, is making sure my marriage is secure, making sure my kids are good, making sure I'm able to, to finish a book. This is the newest book, Crown of Sight. You can get it on Amazon or any retailer, actually. You can get it in hardcover, or not hardcover, but hard copy, which is a paperback. And you can also get it in ebook. The ebook's 99 cents. The paperback is like more than that. It's like $5, but that's as cheap as I could make the paperback and get it distributed to everyone that isn't Amazon. But people are frequently asking to buy this stuff not on Amazon because they don't want to buy from Amazon. So I've tried to fulfill that need. So you can get this on any retailer now. But anyway, so I think being able to achieve some external goal is a part of satisfaction. You don't want yourself to be completely obliterated by not achieving a goal, which is why it's good to have a process that continually makes you feel good. I say every day, if you work on something for your body, your mind, and your soul, you'll probably go to bed feeling contentment. And those are external things. Those are things you do. Contentment, like outside of that, would be something kind of Buddhist, like some kind of inner peace. And I did a video a long time ago on inner peace. I don't like inner peace, and I don't try to achieve inner peace. I try to achieve satisfaction. And part of that is waging war on my flaws and waging war on the things that I haven't yet accomplished by relentlessly attacking them. And that's another thing about time management that I'll mention. So here's one thing that I have fallen into. I've tried everything. I've tried the scheduling stuff. I've tried all this stuff. Here's what works for me. I have one thing I'm working on, and that is what I work on. And then I have the other things which are scheduled. So I'd say if you have free time, schedule at most 50% of it, because the rest of it you may need to be adaptive and focus on something else. But I focus. It's more about focus. Whatever you have in your life is the result of your ability to focus on it. So this was when I decided I was going to take a break from messing with the book that I was on, and I'm like, I want to write a short book that I can get to market quickly. And I had a story in mind, and that's what Crown of Sight is. It was a short book that I wanted to get to market quickly, and I did it. I focused on it. I wrote most of the book in 2 days, and I wrote the rest of it over the next week, because I had lots of busy things. We had a baby coming, all that kind of good stuff. This book came out on the 22nd. My daughter was born on the 25th, I think. So this came out right before my daughter was born. Really cool to get that out before she was born. But I focused relentlessly on that. I didn't work on music. I did my customary YouTube stuff every week, including this stream, which is part of my scheduled stuff. But I didn't practice music. I didn't work on a different book. I didn't go back and read some draft of a book that I haven't put out yet and think about it. I'll do those things as I focus on them. I've learned that dividing up my attention doesn't work for me. So one of the ways that things come out is I'm focused like a laser while I'm doing something. I'm focusing hard on the thing that I'm trying to finish. For the music that you heard in the intro, which was my music, David V. Stewart's Zool, I would work on one song at a time until that song was done. And then I'd take a break from music and work on writing for the next week until I had some more musical ideas kind of percolating around. Then I'd sit down and I'd do nothing but that for a weekend or however many days it took to get the initial file out. Then when it came time to release the album, after I came out with Water of Awakening, I sat down, I remixed and remastered every single song and came up with the initial masters that became the album. So for me, focusing on one thing at a time really helps. And I think that's a lot of the priorities, right? If you have 20 books in mind, you need to pick one that's the only one you're going to do, and you'll probably get it done. If you have 20 projects that you're on, you need to put as many as you can off of the focus and just focus on one till it's done. That's the way that you're actually going to get things accomplished, rather than feel like you're spinning your wheels. Like I'm writing, I'm working, I'm making movies, I'm doing this stuff, and nothing's coming out. If you feel like you're spinning your wheels, focus on one thing at a time. This is exactly what Jared says right here. I remember when I began to write scripts many years ago, and I wrote a lot of projects all at the same time. And I realized I had to take a step back and focus on one project at a time. Absolutely. I have had this exact same thing. In fact, I went through this process last year trying to edit and write a book at the same time. Didn't work. Just focused on writing the book and I got it done. Now, that book hasn't come out yet because I need to edit it. But it will come out, and I think you guys will like it. It's kind of a story from my fantasy setting, but you'll find out about it when it comes out. It's cool. Jaron Crash says, I like that your vids come out at 4 a.m. just in time for my morning commute. Awesome. So you must be on like the East Coast or something, because I usually get them out at like midnight, 1 a.m. when I'm finally get them uploaded and get all the little data entered in. What are your opinions on how people can never truly have original ideas, just different variations of different ideas? Well, you have to think about, originality is a constructed concept. Just kind of like authenticity is made, not found, if you've ever heard that. Originality has to do with the relative things around it. And so if you look at the history of art, if you were to go back to the 1700s and you were to let them hear Igor Stravinsky. It would not go over well because it's not speaking the language people are familiar with. So the goal is communicating concepts. So to communicate concepts with somebody, you use language that they know. There's this interface that exists between us called language. And right now I'm speaking English, and hopefully you understand English. And maybe you speak another language. So maybe you're in Sweden. And so if you go talk to somebody else on the street there, you're speaking this common language called Swedish. Now, if you actually wanted to communicate to that person, you would speak Swedish, which are words that you both know. And you assume that the other person knows the words and that their meaning is fixed. This is a thing that people often don't get when I say that the meaning of words is fixed. It's fixed between you and me. I don't get to use a different meaning from you if I actually want to communicate any actual thing to you. So we have this interface called words. So you can't really come up with too much in the way of original words. You can coin a term every now and again, Klangfarben melody or something like that. You can coin a term, black metal, right? But you can't just create a new language and expect other people to understand it. And so it's the same thing with music. So you go back to, let's go back. You can actually watch this on YouTube. I tweeted about this a couple times because I'm like, people are complaining that art sucks. It's like there's a free, amazing performance of L'Orfeo, one of the very first operas by Claudio Monteverdi, on YouTube right now. You can go look it up. It's worth 2 hours of your time. It's an amazingly well done performance, very historically accurate. They even have, they even have a full continuo section. It's great. For Claudio Monteverdi to come out with that, he was pushing the envelope of sound in this transition from the Renaissance to the Baroque styles. So he had to use what people were familiar with and add things that they weren't familiar with to surprise them. If it had been completely unfamiliar, completely original, no one would have understood it, just like if you let them hear Stravinsky. So these things occur in developmental order because you can't jump steps. You have to be operating in the language that people are able to understand. And if you're operating outside of that language, you're not going to communicate anything to them. So you really can't come out with truly original ideas in so much as they're abstracted from the way that you're communicating them. Just like, it's like, I have a completely original idea for art. And you just put a bunch of smears that represent something to you, and somebody sees it and they're like, it looks like a bunch of dumb smears. Can you paint a picture of something? You need to operate in the visual space that people are familiar with if you want to communicate meaning to them. So the goal is to communicate meaning. And in order to communicate meaning, you have to use concepts like language. You have to use familiar musical devices, the devices that people are familiar with. And you have to use the means of communicating that people already have access to. So for instance, you wouldn't try to tell the story of a movie through paintings. Like you could, like with a comic book, but that's lots of images. But you probably wouldn't do it with like full-size paintings. It would take up like a football field of proportions to see all of them. You would do it through movies, so people are already used to seeing it with movies. So reinventing the mediums that people operate in, same thing, and I've pushed envelopes there. I've had poetry to be read silently over music. I've done different weird things artistically over my however many years I've been doing this. But they don't always work out as well as just going with what people are familiar with and then doing something new within it. So it's almost always same but different. Right. Let's see. All right, I'm way behind on the chats. I'm going to try to catch up. So Jared says, I work on my projects at night. For me, it feels best. I'm most peaked at night. Some people peak in the morning. Some people peak midday. Some people peak at night. And so this is another thing about how you have to schedule stuff. In fact, here's something that you can do, and I've done this. And so this is kind of how I come up with my methods. Take a week. Instead of going on a vacation, do nothing and see what you do during the day. Just at any given moment, do whatever you want to do and just figure out what you did and take a look and see on the third or fourth day what you were doing. Because the first day, you're probably going to spend all day playing video games because you've been at work. The second day, you play less. By the third or fourth day, you start actually doing the things you want to do. And you see, look at what you do and when you do them. And that's going to give you an idea of like your ideal schedule. And then from there, you kind of figure out how you're going to push yourself from there. So it might be that you like to go to the gym at noon. That's when you're peaked to exercise. See if you can figure out how to go to the gym during your lunch break. Take a longer lunch break and go to the gym. And those are things that will help keep your life feeling like it's actually ordered and progressing. Robert Jackson, $10 super chat. Thank you very much. He says, congrats on the new baby, by the way. I really appreciate that. She's awesome. In so much as she's able to communicate her needs in the form of, I'm tired, I close my eyes, and I'm hungry, feed me. She's great. And the truth is, babies come out of the womb with personality. They have their own preferences for how they like clothes on them, how they like to be held, what they like to look at, all those sorts of things. And my son was no exception. He came out with a preference for like how he liked to eat, what order he had to eat in, how much he wanted to eat, which breast he liked to feed on, things like that. Every kid comes out with a little bit of personality. It's very interesting. Let's see here. You can always plan ahead by planning to die alone. That's not very helpful, is it? All right. Pete says copyright can get really bizarre. We're going to transition to copyright at some point here. Mueller, which is Mahler's secondary channel, he got a copyright claim because he played a game that had vaguely similar music to something else. Yeah, I mean, we could talk about those particulars and I can give some advice on it. I wanted to talk about some of the concepts before I got to the particulars. Let's see what else I'm missing here. George used a lot of cut-up technique. Yeah, that's interesting. You cut up what other people do and rearrange it, and then you can kind of create something new and original. Jack Cool says, achieving this military officer commission goal. I can't describe in words how big a deal it's been to my self-image, confidence, etc. It's so rewarding to improve yourself. Absolutely, And you know what's great about the military, actually? So I couldn't join the military because of my tympanic membrane not existing, which is, I guess, they don't let you join. And if you don't have an intact tympanic membrane, you can't dive and things like that. And my friend Mike, who was actually a Navy SEAL, he was on like medical leave for a while because he had a perforated tympanic membrane, which meant you couldn't dive. And he was like, I'm so happy I didn't like diving. He decided he was going to be, in fact, that guy, he decided he was going to be a Navy SEAL, and he did it. Now, how did he decide he was going to be a Navy SEAL? You do it, and as long as you're able to relentlessly pursue that and it's within your capabilities, the military will create the process that will deliver your goals. They're very good at that. So one of the things that people will talk about going into basic, you come out of basic training in good shape and mentally prepared for whatever your mission orders are going to be. And that's a process that delivers a goal. And so if you go to OCS, this is something like when my dad, when he was in the Army, he was an instructor of various kinds. And, he was a marksmanship instructor. But one of the things is, people, you hear that people flunk out of these, they flunk out of OCS or something like that. The point of OCS is not to eliminate the people who can't hack it. That's just a result of the process. But to take those who are prepared and willing and ready to be officers and make them officers. It's the process to create officers. And it's the same thing with BUDS, which is the Navy SEAL training regimen. It creates, by the time you finish BUDS, you're a Navy SEAL. Like it creates in you all of the mental and physical preparedness you need to begin your actual mission as a SEAL. And that's why it's so intense and so hard. And so what people think of is like, oh, it's really hard to make it all the way through. Yeah, it's hard to make it all the way through. Of course, it's extremely strenuous, but they don't think about what the process delivers, which at the end, it delivers a Navy SEAL. It delivers somebody who is better than they were when they entered the program. That's really the point of it. And people who aren't ready to make that big ramp up, yeah, they get eliminated, but that's just how it is. That's part of the process. It's not about eliminating the non-hackers. It's about making the people who can hack it into what they need to be. Kind of interesting, kind of switch of perspectives. Yeah. So yeah, get through your obstacles and keep on the road, and you'll have great success. Robert Jackson says, I really appreciate these videos. I'm on a 13-day streak of writing every day now, and I'm starting to sprinkle in prose as I write, and it's coming natural to me. Excellent. So this is one of the things I talk about is like, if you want to have a goal of writing a book, write every day. Make this as consistent a part of your schedule as possible. Just do it every day. And maybe you have a wacky schedule and you're like, oh, I have 30 minutes. This is how I used to write. Like when I worked full time, is I'd have like a dead hour after school, but before like I had a gig with the band or whatever. So I'd just sit at my computer and I'd write as much as I could in that hour. And even now, like, my son's going to take a nap. Okay, I'm just going to write for a quick hour, right? And that's the way that I got a lot of stuff done. It's finding those extra little times, like I'm prioritizing writing. Here's an extra 20 minutes. I want to write during those 20 minutes. So I appreciate that you appreciate that. Of all the writing advice I've heard that has helped me more than anything to get writing consistently and not be too self-conscious. Absolutely. So here's one of the things too, is you may get to the end of your first book and you realize it's not good. That's okay. Do not feel bad. Most people never finish a book, even a bad book. So finish a book. You can look at it and be like, it's not everything I wanted it to be. It's okay. You have grown so much by the time you're able to finish that book. Being able to look at your work and know that you could do it better indicates that you've grown enough during the writing of that book to make the writing of the book worth it, if that makes sense. So knowing your own shortcomings when you start indicates that you've grown enough and have enough perspective to identify them. So even if you get to the end of the book and you don't feel like it's ready, or it's just not as good as it needs to be, or you got to rewrite it, or you want to write a different book, it's fine. Finish the book, and that is what's going to make you a writer. To me, a writer is a person who writes and puts out books. So that's it. By the way, if you want my attention, make sure you're at David Stewart. I may skip your chat if I don't see that. Image the android. So, at one time in my life, I found satisfaction from within and lived only in the moment. Went with the flow. I did that for a year and a half, but as soon as tragedy struck, I shattered to pieces. Yeah. Well, you have to have some stuff in your life that's consistent. And I've had really bad things happen. Everyone has that suffer, and it's really hard to pick it up and move on. But the more things you have in your life that are consistent and stable, the more quickly you'll recover too. So having family that you're close to, close friends, a job that is really secure that you care about, all of those things will keep you going after a big tragedy. Definitely in my experience, that's true. Contrarian says, a writer does not own words any more than a painter owns colors. So let's dispense with this originality fetish. Well, a painter owns the painting he makes, right? Because it's not about the colors. It's a great analogy there, colors and words. But the order you put them in, the meaning they convey, is up to the artist. Those are not random things, and they don't arise out of random combination. It's not random, in other words, right? They don't arise out of the fact that there are colors. Paintings do not arise out of colors. Paintings are created by people, right? It's not an order out of chaos thing. So there is originality. But the question is, what are you trying to communicate? Because if you're completely original and nobody understands what you're doing, there's no point to it. Let's see here. Rusty says I'm a right breast kind of guy. Someone says I have a trademark on the mountains. We'll talk about copyright in a second. And just what it means, because it's a really philosophically complex topic, and it's legally complex as well. And I can't give legal advice because I'm not an attorney, nor would I want to. Even if I was an attorney, I would tell you to consult an expert attorney near you for your particular issue. But I can give general guidelines for writers, and that's kind of what I want to talk about. Some people have tried to, Apple tried to copyright the letter I, or tried to trademark the letter I for like iBook, iMac, that kind of stuff. And I don't actually know if it worked because it was too contextually open. Ash says, this might be off topic, but do you think writing movie reviews improve your writing ability? I always write them when I want to write something, but I can't think of anything. Absolutely. Everything will improve it. So it improves it in two ways. First way is you're writing prose, you're combining words, so you're flexing your intellectual muscles for how to communicate your thoughts in an effective and coherent and hopefully original and interesting way to the reader. The other thing is you are thinking critically about that movie, which makes you think about how the story was constructed, its flaws, what worked, what didn't work. Movie reviews or book reviews, or writing those out actually does improve you in both those ways. One way, thinking about the subject at hand, and the other way, writing the prose, because that is an exercise. Just like how writing a short story will improve you as a writer. It'll improve you as a writer in that it'll improve the way that you're able to write prose and write dialogue and all those things. It won't improve your ability to write a long book, because bigger plot things just require more experience and understanding how the details relate to something larger. It just requires working in the longer format a little bit more. But absolutely, you will improve your writing by writing short stories or writing nonfiction. It's all going to be building the same muscle, if you think of it that way. Let's see here. Let's see what I missed. How do you write? How do you muster motivation to write? So again, like if you're having problems being motivated, there's something wrong with your life, right? I don't have problems being motivated most days. The problem is, how do I fit that motivation in with other priorities? That's always the balancing act for me. So if you sit down and you're like, I want to be a writer, but I don't feel motivated to do it, you have to ask yourself a deep question, which is, do I actually want to do this? That's not the most popular thing to say to people. Like, you have to stop and think, do I actually want to do this? But it's a hard question. You have to stop and think about it. And one of the things that you can do is you can force yourself to do it because you know you want to have the product done. And here's another thing about writing. There's 4 different processes to creating a book, and not all of those 4 are going to be equally enjoyable to a person. Someone might like the planning phase more than the drafting phase. Some people do not like drafting. They like editing far more than drafting. So you have to get through the drafting phase to get to the editing phase if that's what you like. Or you have to complete the planning phase by drafting and editing a book and publishing it. So you could try to sit down and write, and then just stop and check in with yourself and see how you feel after 20 minutes of doing it. Because most of the time, once you get going, there's feelings that are inhibiting you, and you let go of those once you get in the moment. So you may be feeling like, I'm not good enough. I don't know what I'm doing. This sucks. I'll never finish. There's all this negative self-talk that happens with writers, especially. I suck. No one likes me. Who's going to buy? Writers are notorious because you spend all your time in your head writing. They're notorious for being bad self-talkers and being very self-judgmental. So once you get in the process of just doing it and you just focus on getting those words out, you may find that a lot of those feelings just go away. And if that's the case, then the problem is getting past my self-talk. What's inhibiting my motivation is not that I don't want the product or that I don't like the process even. It's that there's something else that I'm feeling prior to me beginning that's inhibiting me. And that's the case with lots of people. So let's go back to physical fitness. If you've ever been fat or you've known someone who's fat, it's embarrassing to go to the gym when you're fat. Because everyone at the gym, you're seeing the end of their process for the most part, or like some late stage in it. If they're consistently at the gym, they're in good shape. So if you're fat, going to the gym, you're going to feel really out of place and you're going to look really out of place. And so that alone can stop people who are overweight from going to the gym. It has nothing to do with not liking lifting weights or not liking getting on the treadmill and exercising. That may make them feel really good because exercise can make a lot of people feel good. By the way, just an interjection. I have never experienced a runner's high. People talk about this. I'm like, I don't know if you're using the word high correctly. But anyway, so they, may make you feel good, increase your endorphins, increase your energy level, but you feel embarrassed to be there because you feel out of place. And what do you say to somebody who has those feelings? Well, you have to get over those feelings to get the better part of the feelings, right? You have to the motivation isn't that you don't want to be thin. It's that there's something negative inhibiting you. There's some negative self-talk. There's some doubt that's getting in the way of you just doing it and trying it out. You got to try a lot of stuff out. You got to get over yourself. It's like asking a girl out, right? Like it's tough to get rejected by women, but you got to do it. You got to risk it. And a lot of times you're imagining the outcome to be far worse than it is, or you're imagining people in the gym are judging you. Like when I was in great shape, if someone came into the gym and was fat, I never thought like, oh, I never thought anything negative about that person ever. What I saw was, oh, that was me a year and a half ago. I hope this guy sticks with it. Or, this guy probably is really, I can recognize those feelings because I've had them. This guy really, really hope he sticks with it. He's doing a good thing, right? Like nobody, even the most like dedicated bodybuilder is not going to see a guy who's out of shape come to the gym and think he shouldn't be here. Right? No one will think that, right? So that's a thing that you have to think too. Before you're writing all the negative self-talk, you just have to put it to the side and try to focus on the moment as much as possible. About copyright, that's why I asked what about people accusing of copying other ideas? More and more ideas are being copyrighted. Well, we could talk about that. Let's go ahead and transition to that. Let's talk about copyright for a minute, and I can come back to talking about mindset stuff and organizing your time. Really, here's the thing about copyright. So a lot of people use the word copyright in a very normative and large sense. I'm going to use it in a more narrow sense. Copyright is this, right? This book is copyrighted. The combination of words that produce this story with this cover by this guy is copyrighted by me. That's copyright. Trademark is something different. Trademark would be the Crown of Sight. Maybe I make a series, or the Eternal Dream. That's a trademark, right? Now you can register trademarks or you cannot, but you can actually, I'll talk about this in a second, but that'd be like the trademark. You may see Vulcan is a trademark of Paramount and CBS, right? Vulcan, like the alien race Vulcan, is a trademark. Wookiee is a trademark. C-3PO is a trademark. Luke Skywalker is a trademark. Darth Vader is a trademark. What is a trademark? A trademark is a word or phrase or image that is intrinsically bound to a particular brand. So Star Wars is a trademark. The movie Star Wars is copyrighted. So the creative work is copyrighted. Certain things from it can be trademarked. Meaning if you called your movie Star Wars, it would confuse a consumer as to what they were actually buying. Are they buying a movie by George Lucas, or are they buying something else? This is why trademark, most of the time when people are talking about copyright suits, usually they're talking about trademark. So there was a famous one where McDonald's actually sued some Scottish bakery called McMunchies for using the prefix Mick, MC, like McDonald's, right? Because they thought, their argument was consumers would be confused and think that this was an official product of McDonald's. And so when they came in and it wasn't, that would hurt our brand. It would cause damage to our brand. Or somebody is using our brand recognition for their own gain, and that's going to damage our brand too. Like they're competing with us while using our advertising, and both of those could be legal arguments, but I think the actual legal argument is it would confuse consumers. So if you came out with a movie called Star Wars, that's going to confuse consumers. That's a trademark issue. Taking the movie that's been shot, which is Star Wars, and showing it when you haven't purchased the license to show it at your movie theater, that's a violation of copyright. That's an illegal copying. It's like a pirating. If you make an illegal copy, you haven't paid the license for the copy. So when you buy a book or you buy an album or you buy a movie, you're not buying it. Now, if you go buy this and you're like, I have David's book. Here it is. It's pages and paper. You bought the book, but in a legal sense, what you bought is a license to read the book. The license gets transferred when you give the book to somebody else. The license is attached to this physical object, and if you burn the physical object, the license would probably go away. I don't know if any case law has actually figured that out, because that has yet to be figured out. But you can make an archival copy, right? You make a copy of this, then you burn this book, but you have your copy. Is that pirated? No, that's your archival copy. Now you know, part of the license is you've made an archival copy in case the original gets destroyed, which it did, and then you have your archival copy. There you go, right? So this is copyrighted. If you were to take the characters out of this book and write a new book with those characters, what is that called? Well, it's usually called a derivative work. Now, derivative works are very complicated, and since I'm not an attorney, I can't get too deep into them, except to say most derivative works like fan fiction are a violation of copyright. They may also contain within them elements which are trademarked. So with something like Axanar, the question is a trademark violation, not just a derivative work. Because you can make a derivative work that actually is protected by copyright. Your derivative work is actually protected by copyright, but you may not have a right to do that derivative work, because if the derivative work relies more than a certain amount on the original work, that's too much to do without express written permission or acquiring a license from the creator. It's very weird to think about. So if you come out with Crown of Sight 2 featuring the characters in Crown of Sight, you are violating my copyright, because you have made a derivative work without my permission, and it is intrinsically linked with this, and it can't be separated from this. Your work can't exist without this one supporting that one. That's usually like the legal line. And again, this is not legal advice, but this is just kind of what you see come down the pipeline from all of these cases. However, you may also be violating trademark by calling it Crown of Sight. Now, if you call it something completely different, has a completely different brand, but it has my characters in it, it's a little more gray, but if it relies completely on this product for its existence, then you're probably violating copyright. If you rename all the characters and it doesn't rely on this at all, and it's named something different, even though you wrote it as fan fiction, you're good to go. That's Twilight. Not Twilight. That's 50 Shades of Grey. So 50 Shades of Grey was Twilight fan fiction that everything just got renamed. So like Christian Grey was whatever the vampire is in Twilight. And the girl was, don't remember her name, whoever the girl was in Twilight. Bella or something. Anyway, so you rename the characters, you change a couple of elements, but you keep pretty much everything else the same. All of a sudden, it becomes its own original work, and the original copyrighted work upon which it was derived need not have any effect over it. So there's a really weird thing to think about, is that you can create derivative works that then are not attached to the original work at all. It really depends about how you go about it. Now, if I trademarked like the character names, if I trademarked Katak as a character, he's like the bad guy, right? If I trademarked him and you used his name, you'd be in trouble. But if you didn't use his name, even though in your head it's him, you'd be okay, right? It's like when people who say, this character is just a ripoff of that character. It can be, but from a legal perspective, no, it's not. And after a certain amount of time, you realize most characters are based on those character archetypes that I talk about from time to time. They're not quite as original as people think. It's the archetype plus some variations, because that fits really nicely into the way stories work. Most of the time, people think of copyright trolls with some of this stuff, right? About like copywriting everything. Really, it's trademark trolling. You trademark a bunch of things and then see if you can actually sue somebody for violating a trademark. The thing is, certain things can't be trademarked because they're just commonly used. They're common usage. You can't capture it and have it attached to your brand. So if I wanted to trademark book, the word book only means books by me. And someone else says, here's my book. And they're like, hey, I trademarked book. You brought it into court. The judge would be like, get out of here. Everybody knows book is a book, and you can't trademark book. Even if you register a trademark and it's granted, it probably won't hold up in actual case. That's an interesting thing. Now, here's another thing about copyright that I want to talk about for writers before I look at all the chat that I missed, and I'm so sorry I'm behind on the chat, but these ideas are important. As a writer, when you write a book, it's copyrighted. You do not have to file a copyright with the Library of Congress or any other governing entity where you happen to be located in the world for your claim of ownership of your book that you've written for it to be valid. That's a thing that people really don't understand. They think you have to register copyright somehow. No, copyright's a concept that gets applied, and you can register with the Library of Congress. You're registering a copyrighted work. You are not copyrighting it. You are registering an original work that you own the copyright for. That's what that is. And that will provide like an extra, I usually file all of mine with Library of Congress in a couple of different ways to save money. It's like $25. So you can do that, and it's $25, and it doesn't really cost much money. And if somebody for some reason wants to steal your book, you have an extra piece of evidence. Look, I already filed it with the Library of Congress. I published it on this date, on this website, and in these stores. I clearly own it, and this person has copied it. Now, here's another thing that writers need to know. It's really, really rare to get plagiarized, guys. It's extremely rare for plagiarism to happen, whether it is actual plagiarism, which is taking the words, or it's an idea plagiarism, like they lift your idea and write their own book. Because most of the time, first of all, there's so many different ideas with different variations, and there's so many that are just variations on a theme, it's difficult to know who's copied whom. But for the most part, big names are not looking for like unknown writers to steal stories from and then publish as their own. It has happened, but it's really rare. So I think most people get a little paranoid because they've worked so hard. You put your heart and soul into a book to finally bring it to fruition and have it exist. The idea of somebody stealing that is horrific. Luckily, it really doesn't happen that much. But if you want an extra safeguard, you can file it with the Library of Congress. No, you don't have to wait for that little paper to come back from them for it to be copyrighted. You don't have to, some people are like, I have to wait 6 months for them to file the book and send me the paper that says it's copyrighted so that then I can publish the book. No, you can go ahead and publish it. If somebody for some reason is to plagiarize it, you just be like, I published it first. It's my book. You're stealing it. I'll see you in court. Give me money, all that kind of stuff. So let's look at some stuff. I already answered. So funny. I already answered your question. If they share the same premise but everything's different, it's not a copyright problem. It's really hard to win a copyright suit. It's way harder than you think. With music, even with music, it's hard. The same, I think, who was it? Kirk Hammett's guitar teacher, Joe Satriani. He sued. Progressions don't hold up. It's when it's undeniably the same. There's everything in it cannot be viewed as different from the original source material and derivative of it. Then it's a copyright issue. And I think Joe actually ended up settling that. The Rolling Stones actually wrote a song that they found out at the 11th hour was very, very similar to somebody else's song. And they just worked out, they gave her writing credit on the album and a portion of the royalties because it was so similar to just avoid any kind of legal conflict. So on one of them, there's a writing credit, even though she was never involved with the song, because theirs was so similar to hers, they just worked that out, that she would get a writing credit on it. From Darth Kilhoun, would you say you like first or third person more? I'm better at writing first person with some aspects of third person. So it depends on what you're writing. Third person, I like better. Because third person, you have more options. It's a bigger optionality, including the reader is not certain whether any character is going to live or die. If you're writing in first person, but you can do it for both. You can do a mystery in third person. You can do a detective story in third person. Just first person works really well for it. As a writer. Film Girl says, when thinking of different ideas for my stories, I find that they all start to sound the same. Is there anything I can do to change? And think of that. Focus on the thing that you always do the same and do something different. Then when you construct the rest of the plot, it's probably going to work itself out. I tend to do that a little bit with certain things. I tend to have a little bit of a surprise. I try to have a surprise, not at the 11th hour, maybe the 10th hour, right? I like to have a couple surprises. Probably more important to focus on is what things you're going to do to create the effect that you want. So maybe you want people to feel happy in a story. Well, what kind of things do you think will make them feel happy? Well, you can't just have nonstop happiness. You need to have some tension. So to have a happy ending, you have to have a sad middle to later part of the story, for sure, right? That's just how it is. Every story that ends happy has sadness in the middle, and every story that ends sad has to have happiness in the middle. These things kind of go like that. So as you're writing, you have to think about what the worst thing is, and then what the best thing is. And then you're going to create that feeling that you want. The other thing about like escapism, I've talked about escapism before and distraction. That's a little bit harder to do, but if you understand that that's what you want to do, you can create those elements which will help accentuate the escapism. Like with Harry Potter, you start with an abused kid, you take him out of the abuse into a situation where he's loved and I've run very, very long distances, and I've run very, very intense levels for long periods of time. I've never had any kind of physical high from running. It just maybe doesn't happen for me. Or maybe I'm more used to like actual effects of things from my past. So there you go. I can't do it will obliterate you way harder than any real world obstacle. Totally. Robert Jackson says, I think a lot of would-be writers get caught up watching too much criticism channels on YouTube. I know I used to. Fills your head with negativity and the idea that people will laugh at your work. Totally. And I do a lot of criticism on the channel. I don't watch any other channels as far as movie criticism. So people say, hey, have you seen this guy's video? I think a lot of would-be writers... Rusty Heckler says, criticism. I never cared what others may say about my works because the most important person, me, loves my work. Now, I care about what other people say about it because I have customers. So I care about their opinion. But the first and foremost is, am I expressing the ideas I want to express? Am I telling the story that I want to tell? Because if people say, well, I really want you to tell a story about this that you don't care about, I'm like, I'm just not going to do it. Right? It's more important for me. Like, I want to effectively express what I'm talking about. I want to effectively do it. And if there's a reader who... It's one of my experiences. Or I had a 1-star review on Prophet of the God Seed from someone who reviewed like 100 books in one day, who was another sci-fi author. So he went down the list and gave every sci-fi book a 1-star review. I guess to make his book look better or something. It's like the most petty thing that I could possibly imagine. Let's see here. Let's jump down here. Jedi is a trademark. Yes. Name to show up in Google results under mine, and then sell things. That's brand confusion. They are essentially stealing bad food. Now people think McDonald's food sucks, even though that's not McDonald's food, right? It is a brand damage. Totally exists. The other thing would be, McDonald's spent their money advertising for you to just pretend that you're part of their brand. No, that's the same as stealing, right? You're stealing the value of all the money that they paid out to have advertising space. Unicorn on the Cob. Do you agree that copyright can't exist without government? That is, a voluntary society wouldn't have copyright. Wouldn't fan fiction not be a copyright violation if the writer isn't selling it? It is still... Okay, I'm going to address the second one first. There would be no need for them to articulate that if that was already part of basic copyright understanding. What they were talking about is when you would be allowed to essentially use their copyrights. What they were going to allow as far as what qualified as a fan production and not something that actually violated their trademark and infringed on copyrights of their specific work. So copyright's always a specific work. Trademark is the things that can't be separated from it, like Jedi, right? A copyright lawyer, a lawyer that's an expert on intellectual property, could give you a much better legal definition than that. But that's the basic thing you need to know about. So here's the thing. Would a voluntary society have copyright? The answer is yes. So let me demonstrate this through analogy. Let's say Metallica. Let's use Metallica. Big name act, Metallica. Let's say there's 4 guys who call themselves Metallica and book a tour as Metallica. As soon as anybody realizes that's not James Hetfield, Kirk Hammett, Lars Ulrich, whatever bass player they have at that particular point in time, Robert Trujillo or Jason Newsted, a construction of copyright. Now, when we say construction, I mean, we're going to pretend it's real, but it's not, it gets observed. It's observed as the same. Likewise, you can have this for any kind of brand, right? Like I have this Eternal Dream brand. So somebody's going to say, hey, I'm writing an Eternal Dream book. And then the fans are like, only David Stewart writes those. You can't write that. Now, if you're imagining a voluntary society that also has courts, I could take someone to court and be like, hey, somebody published a book in my series trying to capitalize off of the work that I put into this, and the book sucks. So people don't want to read my next books because they're confused and they think this book is the person who creates the work, because that's the only way the work cannot exist, is for that person to not create it. So if you buy a copy of my book, Water of Awakening, great book, and a dragon. There's your blurb. So then it should enter the public domain, and people should be able to make as many derivative works as they want. That's my feeling about it. And that's because the original creator is the only person. Now, this gets much more complicated when you have corporate IP, where a corporation is hiring people for hire. They're doing work for hire. Like you hire a screenwriter to write the script, and that then when they turn it in, they don't own the script. It's work done for hire. Whoever is constructing that movie owns the script. This is actually necessary to make things like movies, because you can't pay out royalties to every person, to the grip who helped like make the movie, to the dude who was behind the camera in one scene, to the orchestra members, like even the executive who rubber stamped it. No one will be alive who created Star Trek, and yet CBS and Paramount will still own the idea of Star Trek, the concept of Star Trek. It's ridiculous. Let's see who else is here. Who does the cover artwork for your books? Depends on the books. I did this one. This is me. I can do a video on how I designed this if you want. It's a pretty simple. I did a video just showing how they designed a recent post, a Robert Jordan book that they came out with recently, which is really simple. Same design, which is like a dark background, a central image. I could show all the different cool things that I did with this particular book too, and some kind of cool lettering. Of course, I think my design is more attractive than what they did for Robert Jordan, but that's just me. So I designed that one. This the art for this is done by a guy named Kerem Bayat. He's a Turkish artist. There's a lot of fantasy art. He's done concept art for a bunch of different things. Fabulous artist. Does great dragons, by the way. Little pricey, of course, but most tins that they created it, and then they offer it for sale, which they can do. The only way it would be, quote, immoral is if nobody charged anything for art ever, right? In which case, I wouldn't sell. The only world where that exists is one where everybody works for free and doesn't expect any compensation for anything they do, if that thing that they are creating is capable of being duplicated on some level. So if the thing that they're doing is capable of being duplicated on some level, like, if they come out with a CD of music, oh, well, everyone in society just never expects to get paid for any work that they do like that. That would be the only way that you can convince me of that. But if you think, and you can prove to me that you think that copyright is immoral if you write a book and you say, other people, please sell this with your name on it. Then you can tell me that copyright is immoral. Because otherwise you're stealing things from me. You're not doing it with a gun to my head, but you are stealing. Just like how if somebody comes into my yard at night and takes my lawn furniture they've stolen from me, should I be able to go and get it back with a gun? You tell me, right? If I'm not allowed to, then we don't really have a big, strong idea of property, do we? Unicorn on the Cop says, literally, if I doodle on a napkin, it's automatically copyrighted. It depends. It depends on how unique it is. Depends on how unique it is. If you draw a smiley face, say, I've copyrighted a smiley face. Like, no, it's too general.
Did you still want to introduce her?
Oh, here comes my baby. Is Rona? He fell asleep? Oh, okay. He wanted to introduce the baby girl. All right, here's Aurelia. Oh, come on. Oh, she's unhappy.
Oh, she's unhappy.
You want to see your happy face.
Where's your pretty sweet happy, huh?
Oh, it's too bright in here, Mom.
Oh, sorry.
It's too bright in here. And I want... Oh, there's some blue... Where's those blue eyes? So you see that bright light? See the blue light?
It's like way too many lights, Dad.
There you go. There's those blue eyes. There's those pretty blue eyes. Yeah. So this is Aurelia. This is my daughter. She's 9 days old.
Really?
9 days old.
Wow.
You're 9 days old, little sweetheart. She just pooped. Did you guys hear that? She just pooped.
For all of you.
Okay.
I guess I'll take you back now.
All right. Thanks for the poops. Feel better now? She's less grumpy now.
There was
with
a
the poop.
smile. Okay, come on, Eva. Let's go. All right, come on. There.
Robert Jackson says, I wish every day I could write my fantasy novel Big Mama's House too, but I can't. Just call it something else. Schwiggity schwiggity schwa. And you probably get away with it. All right. Metal Beast says, it's happening right now with Star Trek Discovery and the video game they ripped off. It's an interesting case to follow because CBS is trying everything to get away with it. Yeah, this is another problem with corporate IP ownership, which I generally have a problem with because of the outcomes in particular. But, you know, a big corporation that has unlimited money, I hear the baby crying. A big corporation that basically has unlimited money to wage a legal war on an individual or a smaller company, that's an extremely lopsided thing. And while courts can point towards fairness, it's really hard to defend yourself against a large behemoth that can spend millions of dollars on lawyers when you're just a guy, right? So there's a strong imbalance that ends up happening. This is one of the problems just with, you know, concentrating resources in a fiction like a corporation, is that the individual cannot compete. The individual is so outgunned in a legal matchup. It's not even funny. Let's see here. Star Trek Discovery and the plagiarizing of the tardigrades game. I'll have to look that up because that might be. I would really like to know more about that because it's very interesting. Copyright is very interesting to me because it's kind of done through case law. You know, it's something that arises through case law, and it's really, really annoying to me how every time Mickey Mouse is about to enter the public domain, suddenly copyright laws change so that he doesn't enter the public domain. Very interesting thing. That's, you know, most copyright laws driven by corporations, but just because it is doesn't mean that copyright doesn't exist, or that individuals who make their own art should never be allowed to profit from it, and should never, you know, be able to recover their time investment back in the form of money. Sorry for the lag. Ash says, are you willing all of your works into the public domain if it somehow made millions of people read your work? Yeah, you know, it depends how that would shake out. I don't know exactly how that would work if I died. How I could like will it into the public domain. But I'm sure there's probably some way to do it. Another way would be to create a trust that holds the copyrights somehow, and is like a nonprofit, so that you can't be just like licensing stuff out years after I'm dead to make millions of dollars. Not that I want my family to have millions of dollars. If I have millions of dollars, I want them to have millions of dollars. But like a trust that would somehow keep that secure, or keep, like, imagine I entered the public, you know, Tolkien entered the public domain upon his death. Imagine what would happen with our current like IP system where, you know, Paramount would make a Lord of the Rings movie, and then all of a sudden they would end up with the copyright for Lord of the Rings without compensating anything to like Tolkien's family. It's like, it'd be ridiculous. So I don't know how that would shake out. All right. Sorry about the lag, guys. Sorry about the lag. It's nothing that I can even see on my end. It doesn't show up. Here we go. It's probably back. All right. Zoivod, thank you for the super chat. Please do an analysis of the new Joker trailer. It has a lot of symbolism, such as him struggling up the stairs at the beginning and then dancing down them at the end. Well done, and has fantastic tone throughout. Grats on the kiddo. Thank you. Because you gave me $20, I will probably do that. I don't normally look at trailers, though. They don't usually interest me. I go see the movies that you guys want me to see, and that's been a pretty good way for me to figure out what stuff I need to see. I missed some super chats. Let me catch up with them. $2.99 from Mercedes Niles. Thank you for the $3. We can't watch your stream. Well, thank you for the $3 anyway. Chat Cool says $2. Stream is donked. The buffer be real. I don't know what happened. Sorry about that. Like on my side, it just showed it the same as always. Showed it working. So I'm not sure what the problem was. Just thinking about technology, right? We're basically operating like magic spells here, and sometimes they fizzle. And we can't really tell why. Like, what god did not get the right sacrifice for me to be able to stream information into all of your brains right now? You know, we failed the summoning. It failed. All right, let me catch up with the chat here. All right. Congratulations for having the baby. Thank you. Your baby girl is beautiful. And now I'm broody. Yes. When I made the earlier brand damage comment, I was thinking exactly of corporate bullying. Yeah, that's a big problem, right? Corporations are a problem. I've gone over this many times. They're often a problem for that kind of reason. Patent trolling is another big one. If you want to look deep, patent trolling is like a big business. Capturing a patent and then suing everybody that's remotely possibly violating your weird code patent on, like, I have a patent on drop-down menus in the right corner of websites, you know, stuff like that. Bob says, I missed your stream and I feel bad. I think I need help with time management. Only if you were doing something that wasn't more valuable than watching the stream. It's all about priorities. Zoivod says, here's another 20. Why not just watch it with us now? Because that will actually cause this to be copyright flagged. Since we're talking about copyright, if I were to put the trailer on now, or like put it on stream, or even have the sound audible, even like slightly, then no one would ever get to watch the rerun of the stream ever. Okay, or I could get a strike. That too, right? Strike is a manual DMCA claim. So let me talk about some particulars with YouTube. I've talked about this before. A claim is an automated thing that YouTube does. If it detects that some music is similar, or it uses visuals from something that's copyrighted, it'll file a claim on some faceless entity's behalf. You can protest that. A strike, that entity has to actually file a DMCA claim. It's a different legal thing. Strikes are really rare. Strikes that are false are a big problem. You could be sued for filing a false claim, a false strike, because it's a false legal filing. Joaquin Phoenix's Joker looks like a cross between Heath Ledger and Cesar Romero's Joker. Interesting. Image the Android says, I think my comment from the other day was using wrong terminology, but try to rephrase my opinion. Corporate IP ownership is wrong, and I think derivative work should be allowed. Yeah, that's like how I generally feel. The question is, does the public know that the work is official or not? To me, that's like where the separation happens. So if you come out with a book and it's trying to look as official as possible, like here's an official sequel to Water of Awakening, not okay. But if you come out and it's your name and it's like, a sequel to David Stewart's Water of Awakening, and if someone picks it up and goes, oh yeah, this isn't official, or an unofficial sequel, like if you made the wording very clear, I would have no problem with that. I'm actually really like fan fiction. I love that people are into that, and are into expanding and thinking about characters in kind of new contemplative ways. All that's fine. If someone wants to write fan fiction of my stuff, they're welcome to, and they can even sell it. I'll tell you can sell it, and I don't have a problem with that. The problem is if you are pretending that something that you made is not, there's something that someone else made is yours, right? That's lying, and that ends up being theft if you're offering it for sale. You forgot to sacrifice a fine white lamb to Forculus, the Roman god of double doors. That's why you get lag. Copyright laws are a good thing, but often it goes too far. Imagine a scientist who wants to get paid every time another scientist uses his formulas. Totally. That's why, like, originally in the United States, copyright was 20 years, which that's a plenty long time to publish your stuff and make money before it enters the public domain. And the idea is if somebody holds on to those ideas too long, you can't get this natural cycle of growth. Like, there should be lots of Star Wars fan fiction. It should enter into mythology and be collectively owned at this point, you know? Are you a fan of Franz Kafka? There's a lot of drama about copyright behind his work. The government of Israel claims to be a copyright holder behind his work. Yeah, I don't believe the government of Israel should own a copyright or like be able to file copyrights with foreign governments. That's bizarre to me. If fan fiction writers say that their work is inspiration from whatever it is, and say like all rights to the authors, would that still be copyright? I mean, it would. It just depends. So if you wrote it with the same character names, obviously the same setting, everything, it would still be a violation of copyright as a derivative work. Chances are. I can't say for sure because I'm not an attorney, and attorneys deal with specifics and they have doctrines that they really know well about this kind of stuff, and I don't know those as well. But I know in most Western countries, even if you're not offering it for sale, it's a thing that's tolerated, not a thing that's strictly legally allowed, right? Because it's up to whoever owns the copyright to defend their copyright. That's another thing, right? So if I own a copyright and I just let people do whatever they want, it's up to me to defend that copyright. And this has actually been a legal defense. This was, I think it was one of the legal defenses in Axonar. I might be mistaken though, which is that Paramount and CBS did not vigorously defend their copyright, which meant if you don't defend your copyright, you're sending a message that you don't care if people use it. It's kind of like abandonware, right? So you can go to Aleph1, ALEPH1, which is a new engine that runs marathon games. These are games that Bungie Software developed in the 1990s for Macintosh and PC computers. They're equivalent to like Doom. I actually like them better than Doom in a lot of ways. They have plot. They have a really cool sci-fi plot. So I do recommend playing the marathon games if you want like a cool classic 3D shooter experience. Marathon 1, 2, and Marathon or Infinity are good games to play. They're abandonware. You can play them for free. In other words, Bungie is not vigorously defending their ownership of those games. Everyone can play them and do anything with them, though they may reserve the right at some point to make sequels. So it gets a little bit confusing if people don't vigorously defend their copyrights, which that basically means that, you know, just like if you have a pear tree in your front yard and you let everybody come by and get free pears, and then you get mad at one guy who takes some pears. It's like, I had no reason to believe you would get mad at me for taking pears because you didn't defend your property rights for the pear tree and allowed people to make pears. So the fact that CBS and Paramount allowed people to do fan fiction like Star Trek Continues, lots of great fan fiction, are they vigorously defending their copyrights if they allow that? I think that was one of the defenses in Axonar. I don't think it really held up. And that's why they came out with those guidelines. They came out with guidelines to say, we tolerate this, but no more. And we'll defend our copyrights if you do something other than what's here, the 15-minute, 2-episode thing. Have you heard the theory that what we know as the Roman pantheon were actually the nature gods worshipped by Roman plebs, and the truly important deities were the familial or ancestor gods? I don't know enough about that to really comment. If you look at Greek mythology, you can see that there's a succession of pantheons. And I don't know about quite the same with the Roman pantheon, but for the Greek pantheon, there's these primordial deities like Nyx and Earth itself and heaven that represent kind of nature ideas. And they give way eventually to, like in mythology, they give birth to children, the Titans, which give birth to the gods. And so a lot of people have theorized that this represents like the replacement of older gods with newer gods. That these European deities replaced older, more I don't know, more primordial deities that were worshipped by the folk. So I don't know. It's all very interesting. We don't have a lot of conclusive evidence, but I'll look into that because that'd be very interesting to me. Now, there are familiar and ancestor gods that were part of this, right? That's why you had the deification of Caesar, which started the deification of the emperors, like to recognize that they were gods and had godlike powers. That existed totally in compatibility with the worship of Jupiter and other gods. Disney is especially bad with copyright abuse. I think a lot of the live action remakes are just to keep the copyright up to date. Yeah. Disney's the worst. And they're going to own all the copyrights before we're done. Unicorn on the Cop says the fact that original creators are first to market makes copyright unnecessary. Well, if the market recognizes that the first to market owns it and no other people should sell it, then that's de facto copyright without the need to enforce it, right? But if you violate that, it's kind of mos maiorum, right? It's the true way. It's the orthodox way. If you violate that, what's the recourse? Do I have the recourse? Do I have a recourse in court for you violating what everybody knows to be right? Probably do, you know. Honestly, film music sounds so similar to each other nowadays that I'm surprised they haven't copyrighted each other to death. Yeah, it's because the entirety has to be similar. Like, you can use the same chords. You can have similar melodic elements. It's really weird how courts end up hashing it out. But it has to be, it's really hard to win a copyright suit for music, I think, unless it's really similar. And then it's mostly who has the money to sue, right? The little guy who writes something, and then I think there was a suit with somebody's estate was suing Led Zeppelin because, like, part of their, I think it was Spirit, part of Stairway to Heaven kind of sounded like the Spirit song from like 1970. Therefore, they stole it, you know. It's a weird thing to happen 40 years after the death, but somebody smelled money in the water and it's like, let's do it. Let's sue them. It's also why we get terrible Fantastic Four movies every few years and all the Spider-Man reboots. So this doesn't have this is not copyright per se that we were talking about. We're talking about licensing ownership. So 20th Century Fox owns the movie rights. So they paid Marvel to make X-Men movies. And part of that contract is that the license will revert back to the original holder, meaning that the film rights will go back to Marvel if they haven't made a work within that licensing agreement in so many years. You'll get the same thing if you publish a book with a traditional publisher, is that if they have not printed the book in a certain number of years, the rights to publish revert back to you, the author. So a publishing company could be a real jerk and have a 100 book run every like 5 years, according to the contract, and never give your rights back to you. The guy who wrote Novels of Gore, whose name I just forget it. And even though it's a pen name, I just continually forget it. He had real problems with that because his publishers refused to publish his books and refused to give him back the rights to publish the books. So if the publisher's not going to publish the book, you can say, can you please revert your rights back to me so I can publish with somebody else, since you clearly don't want to make the money on it. And the publisher, depending on the contract, can say no. And you have to wait for all that to expire, and then you can get the rights back, and then you can go publish them. That's exactly what happened with Novels of Gore. It's a really stupid situation. It's really stupid. Let's see here. Same thing with Arena and Daggerfall. Yeah, those are abandonware. You can play them for free. And Daggerfall is actually pretty cool, even though it's primitive. It does procedural generation of dungeons, which was way, way ahead of the game. They were so far ahead with it, but it was too crazy and they didn't work out. Pete 1972 says Marathon may have had a better story since Doom did not really have a strong story to begin with, but what about gameplay? The gameplay is really similar. I think the gameplay for Marathon games is there's much more complexity to it because there's more variation. So Marathon, with their physics engine, there's different gravity, so you can play different levels that have different gravity. You can play levels that have no air in them, and you have to go and refill your oxygen canister. There's underwater levels. There's levels where you can swim through lava. There's levels where there's alien goo that will kill you. There's so much more variety in the marathon games compared to Doom. It's not even funny. Doom is great. I don't want to say anything bad about Doom because I love Doom too. But Marathon, frankly, is just, it's, there's just more to it. There's just a lot more to it. And I actually think it's harder towards the end I think it's a harder game overall if you're playing the harder difficulties. Super chat from Ready, Set, Go. Thank you for the $5. I really appreciate it. Ian Anderson said that the similarities between We Used to Know and Hotel California were down to the Eagles liking the chord progression of the former. Yeah. Well, the chords to Hotel California, they're found in bot corrals, man. So you can't copyright chord progressions because they've been used so much. If it sounds exactly the same, like you have to get it in front of a jury. It's why it's hard to come up with legal doctrines, I think, for this. So if you were to put it in front of a jury of 12 regular people and they were to hear it and be like, those are the same, then they're the same. And if you hear 12 people hear it and they're like, they're not really the same, then they're not the same. Music's really, it's a crapshoot, in my opinion. I kind of follow this stuff. Again, I'm not an attorney. But so none of this is legal advice. Don't consider it legal advice. And if you have a copyright dispute, you should find an attorney to help you because you do not want to represent yourself or listen to some YouTubers talk about copyright ideas. But anyway, from what I've seen, including there was like one with Creedence Clearwater Revival suing John Fogerty. There's been all these weird high-profile music cases. They only really happen between like rich stars that can afford to sue and lose. You don't get a whole lot of shakedown in that really helps you figure out what music copyright actually is. Let's see here. Oh, skip down. Oblivion and Skyrim. After playing Oblivion and Skyrim, what changes do you think Bethesda needs to make to stay on track for Elder Scrolls 6? And do you think Disney will get trust busted if it continues? So what I think they should do for Elder Scrolls 6, just in terms of systems, keep mostly what you did with Skyrim. Skyrim graphically was good. For the most part, gameplay was pretty good. Rather than having perk trees or I think attributes should be part of it again. I would prefer a leveling system that's closer to Morrowind, but without the chance to hit, which is really annoying when you start playing Morrowind if you've never played it. That you come up with your sword and you're swinging it and it's not hitting. You're like, what's going on here? I'm not hitting this rat, and then finally it hits and it dies. It's because you only had a 20% chance to hit with your sword because your sword skill is so crappy. Rather than having just more like Oblivion where you get more damage and you learn more moves, but those also improve your attributes. But I would avoid what Oblivion did with all of the world. There's world scaling in Skyrim, but it's less pronounced than it is in Oblivion. So I'd probably keep that stuff the same, but bring attributes back into it. I would really like people to feel like they're playing a unique class. And they need to get rid of the crafting trees. Crafting shouldn't be, crafting was super overpowered in Skyrim, to the point where you could carry around a couple of no-weight cloth pieces that would make you immune to dragons. It's just like you have frost immunity and fire immunity. Dragons can't kill you. You can walk up and punch them to death if you want. It was way overpowered. So getting rid of some of the overpowered stuff, but that happens. They'll if they keep it reasonably close to Skyrim, it'll be a really fun game. Skyrim is pretty good. It's not my favorite Elder Scrolls game, but it's pretty good. Film Girl says, if I write a fantasy story set in medievalish times, but they have a degree of modernized thinking, they talk like we do, but I just created the world. I want to know, would that work? Yeah, that's what I do. I keep the language pretty modern. If it's a fantasy world, they don't need to speak like they're from the 19th century, I think that tends to be the go-to. Now, sometimes I use romantic period language, but I use it when a character wants to make a point, So if I use the word hither, right? Like, what does hither mean? It means here, right? Come hither. hither and here are different words. So sometimes it's cool to use a colorful word like hither, but you don't want it to read like it's Sir Walter Scott, and like the person has to puzzle over using thee and thou and those sorts of things. So I have characters use thee and thy when the way that it would have been used prior to the abandonment of the informal thee, thou, in a way to like insult someone a little bit. How indeed with thy wagging tongue? Why did it say thy instead of how indeed with your wagging tongue? Well, thy implies that they're a lower station. So it's a little bit of a little subtle thing there. So sometimes I use the older language. Mostly, though, I try to keep it pretty modern because I don't want people to stop and puzzle over what was being said. I want it to be easy to read. That's just me. And sometimes in my head, I imagine people speaking in a slightly more archaic way that's different from the characters around them. It just depends. By the way, that reminds me, sometimes people like say, hey, you made a grammar mistake here. I'm like, no, I didn't. And they're like, well, this word means this. I'm like, not in that context, you know. It's like the word entreatment, which is used, you know, you entreated before you had a battle, right? Which was you decided if you were going to make treaties or not. You asked for treaties. You asked for peace before you made battle. So it's like, oh, well, this means this. I'm like, well, in Renaissance warfare, it meant this. So that's the context I'm using it, right? Not to, if you're somebody who sent me something like that, it's nothing against you, right? It's just sometimes I use words in a particular way. And sometimes people have thought that I made grammar mistakes when I didn't. Or, or like I use the word leapt. It's like leapt is what I say. I don't say leaped. So I use leapt. And I use the older spelling because it sounds like that when I want to write it. That's just me. Image the Android. If I made a derivative of Needle Ash and gave proper credit, but if I made Needle Ash a worldwide phenomenon, would you still be okay with that even if my books were all anyone cared about? Yeah. Whatever. If they're attached to your story and not mine, whatever. They'll probably read mine. A rising tide lifts all boats. There's no downside, right? Like, what's the downside? So if I don't let you do that, I make no extra money. If I let you do that and you're a worldwide phenomenon, I'm going to make extra money. There's no downside. There's no downside. Speaking of copyright, the theatrical version of Bad Lieutenant had a song that used the main riff from Kashmir by Led Zeppelin. The song can still be heard on Laserdisc. Interesting. So the Kashmir riff was, if I remember correctly, that itself was taken from something else. But I don't remember what. Speaking of, if someone writes a song and sings it and I hear it and then next week someone wants to pay me to sing it to them, what right does the songwriter have to send the government to steal the money I have made and give it to them? The right of you taking the work that they created and you making money off of it. You didn't create that song, so it didn't originate with you. You're profiting off of the work of another person. What right do you have? The question is, so rather than this is the thing that the copyright people always reverse. And no offense, but you guys reverse this a lot. So they reverse the idea of rights. It's not what right do I have to send somebody to come get that. The question is, what right do you have to that property? Because they never establish that you have a right to take what somebody else did and then make your money off of it. They can't establish it because, what right do you have to take somebody else's song and then pretend it's your song and make money from it? What right do you have? So before you can challenge the right to recuperate the damages, you have to prove that they're not damages. You have to prove that you have a right to steal other people's works, which you don't. Right? It's dishonest. It's dishonest to pretend that you produced something you didn't do. And last I heard, free markets ran on honesty. Jack Cool says, I was outlining a story in my head the other day and realized it was true grit in medieval fantasy. You think that these similarities would make it non-viable? Absolutely not. In fact, it would probably sell extremely well, and that would be my logline. That'd be what I would lead with. It's true grit, but medieval. I might even have that as like the first thing on the book blurb. And people will be like, I like true grit, and I love medieval fantasy. I want to read this. And it just, if that's the story, if it's really similar, or it has a lot of similar themes, that's great. True grit, but in medieval England. Bam. You'd be selling all kinds of copies. In fact, that's how a lot of people sell scripts and stuff. It's this, but that. Totally. I wouldn't it's more viable because of that similarity, not less so. Because there's a familiarity that people can attach to before they even read the book that makes them want to read it. Oh, it's like True Grit, these 2 movies that were like landmark Western films. Cool. That sounds like I really want to read it, but with knights. I bet it's going to be really interesting. Precious Slice says, most of what attributes did was replaced with perks, so I honestly didn't even notice. I mean, I noticed it was just a simplification, but it's fine. Like the leveling system of Skyrim is fine. It just doesn't, it doesn't pull you into your class as much as it used to. The fact that like if you played as an archer and you got better and better and better at archery and your agility got higher, everything got higher, that had a different feeling to it in Morrowind and in Oblivion than it had. You didn't feel quite as unique in Skyrim. It's a different approach. It's a little simpler, which is okay. There's nothing wrong with making things easier for people to understand if it's still fun for somebody who likes deep systems, but it's just not as fun for someone who likes deep systems. That's all. Lots of people liked it. I think it outsold its predecessors, so that's great. Build on that. Maybe give the option of going a little deeper. It's one of the things I liked about Oblivion is like you could ignore the system and have a fun time, or you could get deep into it and be very OCD about it, like I was. Man, if Bethesda had just the leveling of New Vegas and Skyrim, accurate impact boxes and more voice actors, their products would be so much better. Yeah, I tend to forgive so much with Bethesda, and the reason is because the game is not always about the gameplay. I know this sounds awful, but like the gameplay is good enough for you to actually do what the game's about, which is about exploring a world. When you go out into the land of Skyrim, it's a world of possibilities. You find something, you find an altar with like a skeleton and there's a book from a necromancer and you read it and your conjuration skill goes up. That's so cool. That's what makes you feel good about those games, is that you can be anything. It's a world of possibilities. Someone says Oblivion has a crappy story. It's like, it's not about the story, it's about your story. It's about the fun things you do while playing it. That's what makes it so fun, Let's see here. Not a fan of FFT, War of the Lions. I love Final Fantasy Tactics, War of the Lions. It's I like the original Final Fantasy Tactics and I like the little remake. I have both. I don't have my Vita here, but you can get it on Android and iOS, and it's actually quite a good port too. Just as a by the way, one of my favorite games. What do you think? And there's a Super Nintendo game that's actually the same as well. I really wish that they would revive the Tactics franchise. Final Fantasy Tactics was such cool gameplay. What do you think of a steampunk that is more reliant upon the 18th century for its imagery instead of the Victorian era? I can't think of a word for it. It's called clockpunk. There is a word for it. It's called clockpunk, which is Renaissance, Baroque, maybe Enlightenment era. Or, there's also like flintlock mage stuff. I don't remember what that's called, but there's ones with like flintlocks but magic, right? You could do that too. So yeah, clockpunk is what that's called, and it is a genre, and it's cool. I'm trying to remember the book. There's a good book in it where they have to like wind up the clock at the center of the earth. I don't remember what book that is now though. Forgotten everything about it, but yeah, it's a thing. Forsooth, one not thinketh too long about the words which one speaketh. Normally, simple grammar will suffice. Yes. Bob, you're correct. Let's see here. Off topic, but do you use a copy edit service, or do you have someone like friends or family member do it for you? I have no one do it for me. I don't hire anyone to copy edit. They don't have any skin in the game. I would hire a friend to do it. I really just kind of rely on people who read it to send me suggestions for copy editing, and then I make those in future editions. I don't hire. I've gone into this before, but copy editors, Nassim Taleb has a much more thorough destruction of copy editors, which is that they primarily exist to create work for themselves, not actually make things better. So he he did an experiment where he sent the same paper to a bunch of different copy editors, and the one, he sent it to one and they made a bunch of suggested changes, but the one he went with only suggested like 2 things, and they were the only typos that mattered, which the other copy editors didn't catch, which was an incorrect date and an incorrect value on something. Like the wording of the sentence made the value seem off. So there was like 2 or 3 changes, and it's like that was the correct copy editing one, because that was the only person who noticed the convexity of it, the alteration that mattered. If I send my manuscript to someone who calls themselves a copy editor, they'll come up with a bunch of grammar suggestions that I'll just reject out of hand. I'll be like, nope, I like the sentence I wrote. That's why I wrote it. I think about the sentences when I write them. And other times someone's like, hey, you put an extra word in here. I'm like, oh, I don't want that. I don't want have to have. I don't want to put, an extra word in there. That's confusing. So that convexity, you want to get rid of the typos that matter. So I tend to do it myself, and that's just how I do it. I don't want to spend hundreds of dollars to not get any benefit. That's kind of how I feel about it. I've gone over it before. We are after 8 o'clock, so we need to wind this down. Let me answer the rest of the questions, and then I'll probably sign off. I had an idea for a segment for these called like the weekly non-argument, or like the weekly fallacy. So I'm going to end with that after I answer these questions. And then I might make another video on it. We'll see. Jack Cool says, stupid town girl sells her soul to a witch to become more beautiful to impress her crush. Family ends up hiring an anti-hero bounty hunter to take the girl and get her soul back. I like that. Sounds like Vampire Hunter D, actually. Probably has a similar story. But I like it. I would read it. Hey, Mr. Stewart, which do you think had better narrative, Skyrim or Oblivion? Oblivion. No. Skyrim. Yeah, Skyrim had better. Like the main quest, the Skyrim is better. Oblivion had, I don't know, they're both good. I like some of the guild quests in Oblivion better. I like the Thieves Guild in Oblivion a lot better, actually. I thought the ending quest for that one was just like amazing. Soundtrack to American Psycho initially had Hip to Be Square, but it was quickly removed from the soundtrack since the producers had only had the license to use the song in the film. Whoa, that's interesting. We need more cool taglines with cool narration voices. It's True Grit, but medieval. I'm about to get medieval on your ass. He fires his crossbow. Shortcuts come when we're at... Okay. Keep working it. It's the only way, it seems. Shortcuts come when we're at my level. Yeah. I try not to take shortcuts. There's no life hacks, right? Let me rant. Life hacks are stupid. The time you spend looking up life hacks could be spent just doing the thing you want to avoid doing, right? And the other thing is not doing dishes. It's an example. Oh, my dishes are never done. Just means you had other priorities besides dishes. Don't feel bad that there's dishes in your sink. Nobody cares, right? If someone comes over and they're like, oh, there's dishes in the sink. That's so bad. It's like, they don't care. People don't care. Don't worry about life hacks. They're stupid. Just do whatever you need to do. If you procrastinate on something that doesn't matter, who cares? Oh, I procrastinated on taking out the trash. It'll have to go in the bin next week. Oh, care. Okay, great. Yeah, it goes in the rubbish bin next week. No big deal. I procrastinated on cleaning the dishes. Now I have no clean dishes. Now I have to wash the dishes. It's like people who meal prep. I did my whole meal prep for the week. I'm saving so much time. Like, you saved no time. You just moved your time from the week to the beginning of the week. It'd be better to be like, oh, I have 5 minutes to eat. Let me eat fruit. It's fine. Don't worry about life hacks. How is singing someone else's song dishonest? You're assuming I'm pretending I wrote the song, but I didn't say that. I could be totally open about the fact that I didn't write it. Depends if you're making money off it. If you just play my song for someone, it's like, cool, do that, right? But it's like, I'm going to go up and perform it, and I'm going to say it's mine. That's really what we're talking about. If you come and say, this is David Stewart's song, you can find him at davidstewart.com, davidvstewart.com. Okay. Nobody's going to have a problem with that. Right. Nobody has a problem with cover bands. The problem is when the cover band says it's theirs and then sells it as theirs. That's the problem. Right. It's the dishonesty. You could do unpopular opinions and I join in. Last I checked, Skyrim didn't have Boromir and Captain Picard. No. But Sean Bean even did his trademark dying trick. That's true. That was before he died in Game of Thrones. I liked that a lot, but Patrick Stewart was in it for like 3 seconds. Same thing with Sean Bean. And most of it, it's not really about the story. It's about your story. Unicorn on the cob, you're incorrect. Saying it's an illegal construct and you have to justify it. You're just shifting the burden of... You're the one committing the action. So any action you commit, you need to say it's either moral or immoral. You don't have to have someone else need to prove that to you, right? Like me going and putting my my dog in the garbage disposal would be immoral. I'm making her suffer, right? I have to justify that it's not immoral for some reason, rather than someone being like, well, it's your job to tell me what's immoral. Like, no. You're the one committing the action. The locus of discretion is on you, the actor. I will admit that the narration was awesome. Yeah. Some people care if their dishes in the sink. They don't get invited over a second time. Yeah, you don't need those people, like nitpickers. You don't need nitpickers in your life. If someone like brings up to you, it's like, when's the last time you vacuumed? You'd be like, I'll vacuum as soon as you leave. I promise. And then don't invite them back. Do you think your knowledge of music enhance your writing ability? I don't think it does. I really don't think it does, unless it's writing about music. I mean, maybe in some really tangential way of like understanding art in general, but it probably really doesn't. Let's be honest. They don't cross that much. What does enhance my writing ability is the lessons I learned practicing music, but those are more like process life lessons, not writing ability. What if someone rejects morality as a concept? Then they won't have a problem when you shoot them, will they? They won't object to you killing them. So if they reject morality as a concept, then you can shoot them and take all their money. They don't have why not? So if they reject morality as a concept, then you're completely within your rights to go and take their money. If someone want to do a symbol, a highlight reel of live streams, would you want it on YouTube? It wouldn't matter to me. I could always copyright claim it and get the ad revenue from it if I really wanted to. Probably wouldn't, but I could. How does copyright affect fan art? I draw an original drawing of Sonic. I own the copyright of that drawing, but yeah, that's the thing that sucks, right? I mean, you can't sell it due to the character being trademarked. Yeah, that's if you make it for yourself, it's no one cares, right? Anything that's not public it only matters when it's public. I don't know. Yeah, it's a thing, right? There's people who tread the line. They like make fan art on Patreon. It's like, you're paying me on Patreon and I'm making fan art and giving it away for free to people. And it's like, are you actually trading money for the fan art or not? No, people are just voluntarily giving to my Patreon and I just happen to make fan art. So there's no exchange of money and Sega shouldn't care. I don't know. It hasn't really been worked out. Copyright's pretty, I mean, it's all over the place. Hearing your unpopular opinions on movies, books, games, and TV would be interesting to hear. What are some examples that bring out the contrarian in you? I didn't like American Beauty. I didn't like The English Patient. I don't really like Game of Thrones. I think it's boring. What else? I'm sure there's a bunch that I can think of that are really unpopular. I thought Death Magnetic was a terrible album. People always get upset about that unless they are a real metalhead, in which case they probably don't. Okay, so I'm gonna wrap this up. Here's my fallacy of the week. It's what I call arguing from the margins. Now, there's actually a right way to do this and a wrong way to do this, and I'm going to talk about the wrong way first because this is the fallacy. Arguing from the margins is where you go to the margin where a concept breaks down or concept ends, and you use that to justify a normative value for the concept. So a great example is abortion. So if somebody is pro-life, they say, I don't believe in abortion. I believe abortion's bad. Someone says, well, what about if the woman doesn't get an abortion, she'll die? Well, the person who's pro-life will be like, that's okay. And be like, oh, well, then you're okay with abortion. It's like, nope. Because the concept is abortion on demand, not this marginal area where, of course, like if she dies, then the baby's going to die. Of course you need to abort it. Like medically necessary abortion has never really been the issue. The issue is the normative value. You can go in and have a government-funded abortion whenever you want. That's what the person's against. So that tends to be how this particular fallacy ends up existing. You argue on the margins and then pretend that it exists as a normative value. And you can see this somewhat in some like legal precedent between what's called like an imperative truth versus a normative truth, is what's sometimes called. So let's say that there's a wiretapping law that says, you can't enter a person's home and place a listening device inside their home. So what the FBI does is rather than do that, they put a microphone outside your window and listen to you through the window and like amplify it. Well, they haven't come into your home and placed a listening device. They placed it outside your home. So empirically, they didn't violate the law, but the normative value of like due process rights, do you want to live in a world where the FBI can use a high-powered microphone to listen to you wherever you are? What's the conflict between those? So when we commit this fallacy, what we tend to do is we argue at the limit where the concept breaks down. They didn't enter my home to put the microphone, and pretend that that's normative, that indicates some kind of normative value. You can do kind of the same thing, let's say with gun control, right? It's like, hey, I think people should have a right to own and bear arms. It's like, what about somebody who's schizophrenic? It's like, well, obviously I don't believe crazy people should be given guns. And it's like, well, then you believe in gun control. It's like, no, you're confusing the limit with the normative value. The normative value is normal people normally can own guns. And the limit is crazy people shouldn't be given them because they're unpredictable and crazy. Normal, predictable people. No one believes in freedom for children and madmen, right? So this is what this happens. Now, you can do this the right way. The right way to do it is you start with a point of agreement. And if you're really good at your argumentation skills, you can work a person all the way back into the normative value. It's really hard for me to think of an example off the top of my head. But if we start with something like property rights, right? And then you work it back over. Is the trash in my trash can mine, or am I abandoning it? And someone's like, well, you're abandoning it because it's in the trash. Well, is it mine until the trash truck picks it up? Oh, no, it's yours until the trash truck picks it up. Okay. But after the trash truck picks it up, it's not mine. No, it's not yours. Okay, so then I can look through it for papers. Oh, yeah. See, I don't think that the FBI should be able to go through my trash. Now you start working them into this thing where it's like, they can look through your trash because you're abandoning it. You slowly work a person into like this the middle normative value, which is trash is abandoned property, and that other people have the right to look at it if they want to, because you abandon it. Same thing with anything else. So that's my little fallacy of the day. It's what I call arguing from the margins. It's something that both the left and the right tend to engage in fairly often, which is to pretend that the limits of a concept are the normative value of that concept. And that's probably going to wrap it up for me today. Let's see here. Last bit on IP. Shouldn't the burden of proof first lie on those who create the system of IP? Well, should the burden of proof lie on those who create the system of ownership of property, or does that arise naturally? The thing is, IP, intellectual property, arises naturally out of regular property rights and actions. So the burden of proof, what's the burden of proof for freedom of speech? I don't know, right? It arises naturally. So the burden of proof would be on the person wanting to do an action, not on the person saying that you shouldn't do an action. I mean, not on the person claiming they have property. So anyway, I guess that's my last little bit about it from there, right? Should the burden of proof be on the person who says property rights exist when I want to get my property back, or should it be on the person who steals the property to say that the other person doesn't own the property, right? Who should the burden of proof be on? I think it should be on the person who takes the property, not the person who created it. All right. That's it, folks. Thanks so much for coming and having those conversations with me, and including the challenges to my worldview. It's always fun to have those conversations. I think about this stuff a lot, and a lot of times it's hard to parse out all the details. Jonathan Nichols or Bloodrock says, to UBP, universally preferable behavior. While important is just ethics without a god to give them authority. I think it's interesting, but fundamentally illogical in an atheistic worldview. Yeah, we'll talk about UPB some other time. It's pretty good. I mean, it's a pretty good non-theistic ethics, but I don't know. The question is whether you, again, how you work back to that normative value with it. That's another, because it's easy to find the limits. It's harder to find the normative value of how things ought to be. That's why Stefan Molyneux often talks about, like, don't be a dick. It's like, well, I just put my toe across the property line. Are you going to shoot me? It's like, I don't want to be a dick, right? Like, people operate in ways that they allow those marginal things to be a little bit fuzzier out of respect for other people's lives. And because people aren't machines that are violation, shoot. Anyway, guys, I'll see you guys later. And you guys have a great day. And you can buy my book. It's out now. It takes about 2 hours to read. So you can read Crown of Sight instead of watching a movie. And just check out what I did with that. It's 99 cents. Fun little read with some high fantasy stuff and some cool concepts about the nature of memory and reality. So hopefully you'll like those particular themes as well. Have a good one. I'll see you guys next time.